Today we're going to look at history and its ideas, reflections in the study of humanities. So we're going to introduce multiple concepts to you, things to consider when we're talking about history and the ideas that come up within history uh, and the study of it. Okay, so let's dive into it. First of all, understanding history. What do we mean by understanding history? Well, it's the study of past events and the profound impact on shaping human society. So, when we study history, essentially what we are doing is studying events in the past, things that have taken place, sometimes millennia, 1,000 years, sometimes centuries, decades before the present time. And we want to study them and understand their impact not only on today, but their impact on the period, whatever period they come from. Sometimes we'll study an individual or an idea that has a context, but that person and that idea did not have an impact on their generation and their time. However, what took place in that historical context led that individual to promote ideas that had a great impact, meaning by great I mean a exponential large impact on generations previous or after that person had those ideas. Um, One individual that would fit that definition is Karl Marx. Marx's ideas did not impact his generation. However, they do impact generations previous and um, they impact ideas today. Um, so, um, when we study history, we understand we're studying past events and their profound impact on shaping human societies. Uh, in that, too, we are exploring human experiences. So, history allows us to explore the triumphs, the struggles, the challenges that define the human experience over time. So, you can look back at the Revolutionary War in America. Well, to look just at the Revolutionary War and the years after that, well, you'd be looking to, the 1770s. But understand those events took place after decades of time leading up to those events actually taking place. So not only do we need to understand the event of the American Revolution, we need to understand the preceding years leading up to the American Revolution. And it's interesting exploring how the individuals involved were impacted and what ultimately led them to make the decisions, the determinations they did, which allowed us to have what we have today. So we're exploring human experiences. We're exploring individuals when we study history often. And two, I've already kind of alluded to this, all of these things have a historical context. The events are influenced by the society, the culture, the political contexts in which they occur. Sometimes what we often do in our current age is pass a particular judgment upon a previous generation as if they should have viewed things differently, and they should view things the way we view them. This is called presentism, where we try to impress our particular ideas and views upon a previous generation culture. Understand that everyone throughout time is dealing with the influences of previous generations before them and the culture in which they find themselves. And when we understand their culture and their ideas, then we'll better understand them as individuals. And so when you study anyone in history, and you study, any event in history, not only do we need to study that event and the dynamics of that individual and his or her influences upon them, uh, is what we need to understand as well. Uh, so take that in consideration. Also, shaping narratives, understanding historical context is crucial for interpreting events accurately and comprehending their significance. So every event had a context, and the narrative that comes from that event needs to also include the context in which those things took place. So when we shape a narrative about something, we can't use our period in time to shape their narrative. And so when we talk about, let's say in US history, when we talk about the Civil War, what we want to do is we want to go back and place judgment upon particularly those who fought for the South and saying, well, they knew what they were doing was wrong. Did they? I mean, what gives us the idea to say, well, they knew it was wrong? Some of them didn't know. Some of them were not fighting for what you think they were fighting. Some of them were fighting because they were being invaded, and the Union Army was coming down south, burning their homes, burning their villages, and taking from their crops. And so they felt like they needed to defend themselves. Some of them were fighting for a way of life and an economic way of doing things. And so that economic way of doing things would be perpetuated. Sure, but not all of them. And so when we do that, what are we doing? We are impressing our narrative in the current time in which we know chattel slavery or any form of slavery is a bad thing and it's wrong upon a people who may not have viewed the world the way we do. In fact, they didn't. And so let's be careful not to shape the narrative of a past event in a past context with the narrative that we hold today. Okay. So, ideas and philosophies. Ideas and philosophies, the study of individual thinkers and the ideas that have shaped societies throughout history. All right. Going back to someone like Karl Marx, his ideas did not shape the time in which he was in, but he was shaped by the times that he was in. And his ideas are now shaping our society and have for generations. Great thinkers, great people who were categorized as philosophers, particularly of the Western tradition. So we'll talk about Western philosophy, going back to Aristotle and Plato and Socrates. These individuals from Athens and the way they viewed the world and the way they thought has had a tremendous impact upon our society today. But they had a context as well. So this is part of the study of humanities. So we are shaped by ideas from the past and individuals with ideas. And so we have to understand that. Also, philosophical movements, examining the impact of philosophical movements on historical events, ideologies, and societal structures. So, understanding in the context of the 20th century and philosophers of that day or psychologists of that day, like Nietzsche or Freud or Jung, um, understanding those individuals and their thoughts and their ideas, it's important because we are a product of the ideas that are put forth because these ideas have an impact on us and they have an impact on society, the way we live, the way we treat one another, how we view the world. Um, and you look at what took place historically in Germany in the 1920s, 30s, and into the 40s, and why we fought World War II. Because philosophical ideas were embodied in a man. This man did not have these ideas, but these ideas took hold of a man, and these ideas were pressed forth and moved forth, and many people lost their lives because of these philosophical ideas. It was made into a movement, and that movement had an impact, and that impact was terrible. So, whenever we come to an idea, we need to find out and ask the question, where did this come from? And why is it here? Um, is it an idea that can make society flourish and humanity understand each other better? Or will it divide us and cause us to do terrible things to each other? Historiography, and that term, anytime you come to the uh, suffix ography, um, there is something to be understood. Geography is the study of um, an interpretation of um, geographical areas. Historiography would be the study of historical writing and interpretation. And when we do that, we take in consideration different perspectives. And then different historians may interpret the same events in various ways due to biases, perspectives, and available sources. So, if there is a biography written about an individual, not only do you have to take into consideration the individual, but you have to take into consideration who is writing the biography. Um, about 400 years after Alexander the Great had died, um, a man named Plutarch wrote a biography about Alexander the Great. And if you read that biography, he basically deifies Alexander the Great, um, talking about his miraculous birth, talking about all these things, and understand in the context of time, um, Alexander the Great dies about 200 years before the, the the beginning of Christianity, and then Plutarch is writing these 200 years after the beginning of Christianity. It almost sounds as if Plutarch deifies Alexander the Great, much the same way that Christ is deified in the writings of the Gospels. Um, was he deity, Alexander the Great? Was Alexander the Great deity? No. It's clear that all those things were written about it from a certain perspective from a certain individual. Um, now that's you know a wild version of what this can be. Um, but also when I've already brought up religion and Christianity. When you read uh, the Gospels, well, they're about Jesus, but there are four of them, and all four of them are written by different individuals. And these different individuals had different biases, perspectives, and they had different available sources. And and a lot of the argument that people make against those the Gospels is, well, they don't sound the same. They're not all the same. Well, because they're written by four different individuals with different biases, perspectives, and available sources. That's why they don't all sound the same. It's not actually an argument against the validity of these events. It would be actually an argument in favor of these events, because if all four of these gospels were the exact same thing, it sounds like one person wrote it and then three people copied it. It's like a homework assignment in high school. But because they are different in various ways, well, it's obvious that they didn't all collude together. So those are some things when we look at uh, events and the writings of events. We need to take those things into consideration. Cultural and social history. What is that? Well, it's the examining of everyday life, cultural practices, traditions, and beliefs of past societies. Um, so, understanding cultural and social history. What is going on in a given culture at a given time? This really comes up in the study of world history, because you know, whoever has a particular cultural perspective tends to lay that cultural perspective on top of whatever area they're studying. But as much as we can, We have to pull ourselves out. That's the challenge, to take us away and to find out what is going on in their time frame. What are the cultural norms in that period of time? What traditions do they have? What permeates society in their period of time? So we need to understand not only the events, not only the context, but part of that context being cultural and social. Um, and then societal structures. Understanding societal structures, roles, and interactions provides insight into the foundations of human communities. And so when we study something like what took place in South Africa with apartheid and the separation between white South Africans and black South Africans, yes, we know in our current context that any kind of forced aggression upon another group is wrong. Absolutely. But in that context, we need to come to that place knowing what we know, but then asking a question like, why did they do that? Not just saying, not just passing judgment to say, well, they were wrong for doing that. Okay, that's a given. But then ask the question, why did they do that? Did they do it to gain power? Did they do it because they came from a different area and this was the colonialization? Why did they colonialize? What is in their history? And it was a British colony, right? And so the British did this in multiple places, not only in South Africa, but they also did it in India and other places all over the globe, not laying blame at the feet of the British. I'm just trying to dive down into why did they do this? So asking those questions. That's what we do. And when we study human nature and human character, why did they do that? Okay. Also, political and economic history, because they have their own history, the political and economic history, the exploring power dynamics, governance, and economic systems that have shaped uh, historical events. So, one of the people I love in history to study is Theodore Roosevelt. And Theodore Roosevelt was known as many things, but one of the things that he was known as was a trust buster. So he was busting the trusts. Essentially, in the early 1900s, there were monopolies that had been created where people were had gained wealth and power, particularly people like J.P. Morgan Chase, J.P. Morgan, which I can't J.P. Morgan Chase, Morgan Chase, but J.P. Morgan, uh, Pierpont Morgan, had Standard Oil, and so he had become so powerful that even the federal government came to him for a loan, and he had more money than the federal government. Well, here comes TR, and he sees, well, they have unfair advantages. And so we're going to bust up these businesses and we're going to bust the trust, and uh, they will now report to us. We won't report to them anymore. So understanding the political and economic power that individuals like J.P. Morgan had will help us to understand the times and the events in which they took place. I mean, that still goes on today. There is political and economic power in the hands of few. And will there be a TR that comes along and says, okay, we're going to bust the trusts again? Or will the trusts continue and their political and economic power continue to dominate our society and the world? We'll see. And we'll see how we as society and as human beings within that society live. So the impact of economics, economic systems influence the development and direction of societies and civilizations. Um, not only do I like Theodore Roosevelt, I also like um, geography and things like that. And really, if you study geography, one of the things you'll begin to realize how these civilizations sprung up the way they did was they sprung up amongst usually waterways. I mean, just look at America right now. Look at where our largest cities are. Our largest cities continue to be Los Angeles, New York, those two being the largest. Well, what's the reason for that? Well, both of them were port cities on the East Coast and the West Coast. You look at the interior of America. Where are these cities? Well, they're along rivers or large lakes like Chicago along Lake Michigan. And, in the 1950s, interstates were introduced. And then not only interstates, but international airports. So why is Atlanta as big as it is? Well, it's along multiple converging interstates, and there's an international airport there. Well, the economics is impacted by geography and even before the interstates there, Atlanta was a major railroad hub. So it's interesting to understand this and to see how people have been impacted by geography and economics. Historical narratives, telling the story of individuals, events, and periods, epochs, to preserve collective memory. So we're telling stories of the old days, of old times. If you haven't yet, if you have a grandparent that is still alive, it would be good to sit down and talk to them about their childhood, for them to tell you stories of their life, their young life, because these are the narratives that are part of who we are. So not only do we have that as a culture and human beings all together, we also have that in our family and our individual units. And the influence on our identity, that historical narratives contribute to the formation of culture and national identities. Uh, sometimes, you'll hear somebody just flat out say, I'm an American. Well, even that statement, I am an American, it holds a narrative. It holds an identity that basically they're saying, I'm individualistic. I love freedom. And so with all that, there's narratives that go along with that. And so they're identifying themselves nationally and saying, I'm an American. Well, that has a gravitas to it and a weight with it because of the narratives that go along with it. Lessons from the past. See, lessons from the past, we're learning from the successes and mistakes of history to inform present and future decisions. This is important. Learning from the past, not only on the macro scale, but the micro scale. Um, if we've done something as a nation that we did in the past that was wrong, we ought not do it again. That's macro scale. Maybe something that happened in your family, and you say, well, we ought not to go down that road again. Well, then be the one that makes the change in your family. Learn from the past. Your past, the past of others. It's good not to repeat the mistakes that we made in the past and move on to the future. Applying historical knowledge, insights from history can guide us in addressing contemporary challenges and shaping a better future. So, to sum this up, as far as this statement is concerned, um, forgetting our past will leave us in a place to not succeed in the future. If we don't learn from the past, we're destined to repeat the mistakes of the past. So we need to have a historical knowledge, but not only do that, we need to do that, we need to apply that historical knowledge. We need to have historically informed perspectives. A historically informed perspective is a gaining of insight into societal development and cultural evolution through the lens of history. So our perspective on the world is informed by historical events and cultures, um, and not merely the culture in which we have at the present time. So we have influences not only in the present moment, but historically we have influences, and we see our culture not not only do we see other cultures and other periods of history through our lens, but we see our culture through the lens of previous cultures. Appreciating complexity, understanding history helps us appreciate the complexities and nuances of human societies. Not everything was clear cut. When you look back at individuals and you shake your head as to why they made the decision that they did, well, it wasn't that easy. We don't have all the knowledge there is. We have very limited knowledge. And with our limited knowledge, we make the determinations we make at any given time. So we need to appreciate that these things aren't black and white. These things are complex. And there are certain nuances that go along with them. So to conclude, history serves as a cornerstone of the humanities. It offers a unique window into the rich tapestry of human experiences. Um, when we uncover the past, and we do that by delving into history, we uncover the stories of civilizations, individuals, and ideas that have shaped our world. We see the world differently than we did before. You know, we have a choice, and the choice is we throw off that history and we just forget about it. And we say, well, the only thing that really matters is now. Well, in so doing, we set ourselves up to a place to fail because understanding history is to understand who we are and where we came from, and why the world is as it is. So, if I were going to ask some questions from this, what might I ask? One of the questions is, how does understanding the historical context of events help us interpret them accurately and appreciate their significance? Um, Also, in what ways can a historically informed perspective enhance our understanding of contemporary societal issues and cultural dynamics? Can you provide examples of how culture and societal history or society history can offer insight into into the everyday lives and traditions of past societies? How might you do that? And how does history as a cornerstone of humanities complement other disciplines and contribute to our overall understanding of human experience? Those are some things to consider. Thank you for watching and listening. Take care and be well.